Okay. As folks come in, come on up front. Come on front. Okay. It's wonderful to see you all here this afternoon. We're very appreciative of the fact that you gave up a Sunday afternoon, and if you're an NFL football fan, well, you're giving up a playoff game. The Chargers are the favorite team of my nephew-in-law who lives in Virginia. And he's not very happy, I don't think, about right now. Wasn't by the end of the first half either, for that matter. But anyway, it's great to see you all today. We very much appreciate the fact that you're here. I look around the room and I see a lot of folks that I know, a lot of folks that I was in ministry with on the Cedar Rapids district and this district. It's great to see you all, and also other districts too. It's great to see you all this afternoon in lots of ways, and for a good conversation. Our aim as a budget team today is to listen to what you have to say, questions that you have. We'll answer things as best as possible about the proposals that the budget team has started with, and that will be emphasized several times over. These are starting places. These aren't ending places. These are starting places. And Bill Poland will say more about that in a few minutes. But our conversation that we need to hear from you, and your alternatives, your suggestions. Did you think about such and such? Well, what about this? All those things will be taken down today and written on the posted boards, and then we're assembling those comments, and those are going on the website too, I think, right? If I remember right, on the budget team, on the conference website. So please make sure that we get things written down correctly as well. Our order today will be that I will introduce Lillian Gallo-Seeger, our Southeast District Superintendent, is also a member of the budget team, and she will lead us in a brief time of devotion that kind of sets the stage for our conversations this afternoon. And then Bill Poland, who's the Director of New Faith Communities, excuse me, will go through the proposals with you that are listed out here on these sheets and explain a few things here and there, but just basically review them again. And then I'll moderate our conversation, basically just, okay, now it's you, now it's you, now it's you. What about that, Lillian? What about that, Maggie? That sort of things. We'll just keep that going and get those things together. We have another listening session next Saturday next Sunday at Carroll United Methodist Church, and then the following Saturday at Ames First United Methodist Church, and then that concludes our listening sessions. It does not keep you, though, from using, let's see, the email is budget@iaumc.org, and it's listed in here. And we very much appreciate you sending that in. Your comments or questions get forwarded to all the members of the budget team, not just one, but all the members of the budget team. We take a look at that. I've responded to a few. Bill's responded to more than that. Maggie responds once in a while, and so forth. We'll do that sort of thing and keep the dialogue going all the way through this spring and all the way through up to annual conference as well. Okay? Questions at this point? Again, thanks again for being here this afternoon, and I'm going to turn it over to Lillian for our devotions. Lillian.
Thank you, Harlan. We should have the next slide for our centering time, and that is Philippians chapter 1, verses 9 through 12, or 9 through 11. I'd like to be placed there so that we can all read it together. That's good. How about let's read this together. And this is my prayer, that your love may overflow more and more with knowledge and full insight, to help you determine what is best, so that in the day of Christ you may be pure and blameless, having produced the harvest of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ for the glory and praise of God. Well, I think Paul's prayer is still the prayer we need as a church. It has three components to that. First is Paul is praying that our love might become even more and more richer with knowledge and all kinds of insight. And that Paul is also praying that we will be able to decide what really matters, so that we will be found sincere and blameless. And then Paul is praying, the third one, is that we will then be filled with fruit of righteousness which comes from Jesus Christ. For what? To give glory and praise to God. Does that sound like a prayer not just for the focus of today, but it's definitely is a prayer for what is to come in February? Love, moral insight, righteousness, determining what is best for the church. While the letter to the Philippians come from an imprisoned, persecuted, struggling Paul, it was addressed to a church that was engaged in their own struggles as well. Oh, although scholars don't normally have a consensus on this, but those struggles would be the rise of all kinds of knowledge and insights on matters of faith, righteousness, and what it means to be a follower and lover of Jesus. Determining what is best is what caught my attention. And determining what is best is both a discipleship and a leadership question. And we are invited to pray like Paul for the church. Let me share with you two Christmas stories that I think have relevance to the making a decision of what is best, not only for our individual witness, but also for the witness of the church. So on Christmas Eve, my family, that's my husband and my daughter Jane Ann, we attended a candlelight service at a Catholic church in New York. We were delighted to participate in that worship, where their choir was a group of 15 professional musicians. And two of them are Jane Ann's friends. 15 professional musicians, and they were actually hired by the church. They were hired for that purpose, to offer to God and to the congregation the best music. It was amazing. This brought me to a memory of a little church in the Southwest District whose special music on Christmas Eve came from an 80-year-old Lois. She was not hired. She offered her gift. Now, Lois was suddenly widowed at age 45. And she shared part of her story is that she has to learn how to farm in order to save their family farm. Her church choir were losing members to death, and she took it upon herself to continue the ministry of offering to God special music on Sunday morning and on special events. Well, you probably asked me, what was best? The 15 hired choir members or Lois at Northborough United Methodist Church? Lois offered to God what is best. And it sounded, I am certain, it sounded pleasing to God. So, this is my prayer for the church, and let us pray. May our love for God and to God's people become even more and more richer with knowledge and all kinds of insight. May the church be able to decide what really matters, so that the church will be found sincere and blameless. And may God fill the church with fruit of righteousness which comes from Jesus Christ, so that the church will continue to give glory and praise to God. Amen.
Thank you, Lillian. Before we go any further, I would also like us to give thanks to the North Liberty Methodist Church, to Dale in the tech area there, to Margaret out there who baked the kolaches. Don't forget the kolaches. I lived long enough in this area, 21 years, to know that the absolute best and most original kolaches come from this area. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They don't taste the same in Des Moines or someplace else, but this area here, and to thank them for hosting us as well. Go ahead. So now I also want to make sure, before we go any further, we make sure that you know who from the budget team is here, and that's Lynn Calvert. Yeah, stand, please. Lynn's had a very quiet weekend. She's done absolutely nothing. She's well rested. School for Lay Ministry. Yes. So many of you know Lynn. Also, Maggie Biggs, who's our conference conference treasurer. Welcome her too. And Bill Poland, I mentioned about him earlier, our director of New Faith Communities. Lillian, you have just heard from. And Dwayne Davey, who is a layperson and the past president of the conference trustees and is our member to, come on up, John, and then also our lay member on the board of the iReligious Media Services. And John Disberg, who is making his way to the front now. He may have had a chance to get in here with us as well, who is a clergy person and is the chairperson of the Council on Finance Administration. So, and today we don't have with us, help me remember now, Paul Burrow, clergy person who's also the chair of CCMC, Conference Connectional Ministries Council. He is doing the really tough duty of being on vacation on a cruise from Florida to Cuba, along with a number of other clergy persons too, if you follow Facebook somewhat. So I think Jackie Bradford and some others along there too. So you can keep them in your prayers for the really tough things that they're having to face right now. So as well. Okay, great. So Bill is now going to take us through our starting points, and then we'll continue the conversation.
Thank you, Harlan. And I will share that this presentation of our priorities or our proposals are different than the one that we shared with our boards and agencies. Slightly different. And the reason, as we are hearing suggestions, we're trying to incorporate them as we go along. So quite literally, all of you here today are helping us to try to shape what we're doing and to express it better. And I'd like to begin, if I could, with our vision and strategic objective. And this is what we started with. The budget team is an L3 team that focuses on loving, learning, and leading. And every member of our team has had previous experience on another one of our L3 teams. And so we've used that process as we put these recommendations together. And every process in an L3 team starts with a vision and a mission. And our vision was a budget that connects our resources, our people, lay, and clergy to be in ministry with our communities and our world. And then our mission, which was given to us by the bishop's operational team, was to recommend an overall 2020 budget that is missionally aligned with our strategic priorities, our vision, and our mission that is at least $1 million below the 2019 apportioned budget. And in that, we have some values that have grounded our work. One of the existing values that we seem to operate under is the assumption that money equals ministry. We want to move from that sense that money equals ministry. That is, if I send my money, I can do so without experiencing personal transformation. We'd like to lead the conference in moving to a place where we understand that personal investment equals ministry. We feel that the farther a person gets from the ministry that is happening, the less transformation happens for everyone. So in all of our proposals, we're trying to think of ways that can bring people, congregations, and ministries together in ways that have mutual impact. We also want to move away from an understanding of the conference as something located in Des Moines, and that our apportionments are the most tangible example of our connection, to an understanding where we are a conference together, in ministry together. Literally, when we talk about the annual conference, we don't talk about its leadership structure. We talk about our congregations, lay and clergy members who make up the annual conference. So those are our underlying values that have been part of our conversation. And then finally, this brings us to a two-part recommendation. And our recommendations really cover two areas, and we've tried to be equal in our recommended reductions over both of these areas. The first is with operations, and that is our staff and conference operations. And the second is our program ministry. Now, some folks have already said to us around these recommendations, which we see as operational, that we are beginning to make changes. And the reality is that when we talk about our conference operations, we are in a place, and we believe we will be for the foreseeable future, that when we can see opportunities for reduction in costs while maintaining or increasing efficiency in ministry delivery, that we have to take those. We feel that's part of our responsibility as leaders in the annual conference to be faithful stewards of all of those resources and opportunities so that we can impact minimally or as minimally as we can the ministry areas of our annual conference budget. And so to that end, we have recommended a move from 8 district offices with 8 district administrative assistants to 4 by-district offices with 4 district administrative assistants. The district files and equipment would be housed with the DAA in the district office, and it is our intention and the superintendent's commitment that they would work from virtual offices throughout the district. The intention is to be accessible to the local church and to our laity and clergy. Just a brief understanding of that is that superintendents would intentionally schedule their time around the districts that they serve so that they can be present physically in all areas of the district over time. That those schedules would be published and that their accessibility would be increased rather than decreased as they make their ways around the district. Our estimated expense reduction for this move would be $319,000 for the year 2020. Our second recommendation is that we reconfigure the deployment of associates for congregational excellence from 4 full-time positions to 2 full-time positions with the focus on revitalization, and 2 one-quarter-time associates to resource new and existing immigrant communities of faith. This would enable us to acquire some additional and broader cultural competence, and we recommend that implementation to begin as soon as we can in July 1st of 2019. The estimate expense reduction for this year would be about $60,000 and $120,000 next year in the budget year 2020. And in order to facilitate the move towards 4 district administrative assistants, we recommend, in place of the support staff position, which has been the assistant support for the secretary, excuse me, for the assistant to the bishop, we recommend moving to a secretary to the cabinet. And that person would take minutes, track the appointive process, and audit the clergy of laity and churches. They would schedule clergy moves and release appointments along with other duties. This would relocate some of the responsibilities from the district administrative assistants to increase efficiency there, and it would also relocate responsibilities from superintendents to allow them more time to serve as district missional strategists. The expense reduction for 2020 would be $45,300. And that is one because we can, in order to make this happen, we have to have this position in place by the time we make the reduction of district administrative assistants. So I believe the interviews, and we're trying to do this internally, those interviews will be held this coming week. Is that right, Harlan? And then lastly in this area, to combine address services and journal editor position, currently occupied by Jill Stanton. Jill is retiring in March. And to combine those responsibilities with the Director of Ministerial Services. This would involve a shifting of some address entering information away from this position also to the Secretary for the appointive cabinet. And the estimated expense reduction for that would be $51,240 in the year 2020. And then this moves us to our program ministries. Recommendation number 5 is to reduce the apportioned funding to the Board of Higher Education and Campus Ministry from $544,933 to $44,933. We recognize that this is a dramatic reduction. It is our hope that local churches will take this opportunity to partner with our Wesley Foundations and United Methodist related colleges and even beyond to expand ministry to young adults. The estimated reduction there is pretty clear at $500,000, $500,000. Number 6 is to reduce the apportioned funding of community and institutional ministry grants by $150,000. The estimated reduction there, again, pretty clear at $150,000. And then number 7, to end our apportioned funding of the Iowa Religious Media Service. And this is the one exception in this ministry's area. Because the support for that ministry is overwhelmingly from this conference and because of our current budget situation and also the usage that we've been able to estimate of that service, the recommendation and now actually the action is that funding will end to IRMS on March 31st. Yes, of 2019, this year. And then finally, our last recommendation is to reduce the apportioned funding to the Board of Camping and Retreat Ministry from $887 to $617,887 for a reduction of $70,000. As part of this and the move for many of our ministries to become more self-sustaining in partnership with other ministries, I know the Board of Camps is working on a proposal that they will bring to annual conference for the sale of one of our camps. Those are our recommendations, and I'll turn it back over to Harlan.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. So one other thing that we might also add to this is what Maggie's worked on in terms of last year's, the end of 2018's budget. It was estimated, Maggie did a very good estimation on this, that we would have been at least $1 million, if not more, $1 million short of paying all of our expenses in 2018 and that's even reduced expenses, which means that we're dipping into the $300 million reserve, $300 million? $3 million reserve, excuse me. Boy, word if that gets out, that'd be trouble. The $3 million reserve, we're dipping into that by $1 million for 2018. And that's something that the budget team and CFNA believe that we cannot continue to do. And even looking for ways to try to replenish some of that, but we just can't continue to do that sort of thing. So that's precipitated the need for budget savings in 2019 also at this point. And by the way, you'll be getting an announcement from the conference communications office tomorrow about IRMS and that I've written, and the rationale. Bill's already talked about that, but we've also made a commitment as a conference leadership to work with IRMS as they go through the transition for what this means for them, because our funding for that is well over 50% of their budget, and has been for a number of years, and that makes it a very tenuous organization for that. But also work with the congregations, which is about 35% of our congregations, not all by any means at all, to work with them in the transition, what that also is going to mean too. So it's not just simply ending and running, but actually it's ending and trying to work out as best we can what the transition is going to look like, so the local churches get support as they need for media services. Okay, so now's the time for conversation. Again, questions, comments, alternative proposals. Have you thought about this? Whatever, we're going to record all that. Dwayne is going to be walking around with microphones. We want to make sure, and so is Maggie, and we want to make sure everybody gets a chance to hear your question or comment. We want to make sure that there's enough time to address everything on the proposals. So I'll be kind of watching time somewhat, and we may need to move some things along as we go, but we're ready to begin that. So who would like to start? Joe.
I'm looking at the reduction of funding to the Board of Higher Education and Campus Ministry. And while I understand why there would be a move to try to get that more connected with local churches, which I don't think is a bad idea, but I'm not sure, what kind of transition time we're talking about here doesn't seem to me to be workable. I just think if we're going to think about funding our Wesley Foundations differently, then somehow or other we have to help that happen before we make this kind of a drastic cut. Okay. That's my comment.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Thank you. And by the way, one of the things we're looking for, too, just to go on with that, is that what type of transition would there need to be? You may have some ideas about that. What type of funding might there need to be? Because we're looking for that feedback from anybody and everybody who can give us. Clint.
Yeah, I guess I have a lot of different questions, but I won't do all of them right now. I'm just curious in terms of other places you've looked to cut. Like, have you looked at 4 district superintendents instead of 8? Have you looked at selling the conference headquarters building and moving into a different place? And following up on this question of campus ministry, so if you've looked at all these other things, like, why did you kind of zoom in on that program as being the largest place of cutting?
Want to answer that at all? John? Bill?
Can you start with the questions, Clint, one at a time? We'll try to address those. One of those I caught was the sale of the conference center. What I can share with you is we did try doing that at one time. You may remember, well, most people in this room will remember when the conference center was located on Methodist Hill. That property was sold for $5 million. At that time, it was the understanding that the corpus of that money could be used, that the interest would be able to fund a leasing arrangement for conference space. What actually happened because of increase of lease and costs was that corpus in principle, not just interest, became depleted very quickly. And so the remainder of that, it was determined that we could actually own at a less expensive rate than rent for a number of reasons, and also be in control of the property. That was the rationale for that decision. When it was on Court Avenue and those lease space, it was restricted access. We couldn't use the building at all of the time it was needed. and it was simply more expensive. If it's property that we own, it can be exempt from property taxes, which when you exist in any of our communities, but especially a community like Des Moines, those can become very, very substantial, especially for commercial, as it would be called, properties. So cost-wise, it would be more expensive, not less expensive. But we are, Maggie is leading this, and we just talked about it again today on the way here, of the possibility of finding some other potential nonprofits, because we need to keep our nonprofit status too, that might be partners in receiving lease space in the conference center. So we're trying to be the best stewards we know how with the property that we have, not just for this particular moment, but for the future as well.
Dwayne, you're past chair of the trustees. You have some knowledge about this too. You want to speak to that? As far as leased space, office space, compared to the cost of owning our own building?
Well, I think, Bill was pretty thorough about it. It's just that we think that we don't own the building, so we don't have to pay for maintenance. Well, that's pretty much not true. You lease a building, we have to pay taxes on it. Depends on how the lease is written. Somebody gets to pay for it all. And so when you look at the usage, the access, the rates in Des Moines are very expensive because most of this is what's called Class A office space. And it's expensive. And so by owning this and controlling our expenses with it, at the moment seems to be the most cost-efficient way of doing it.
Good. Clint, second question, so we make sure we get that covered. Third question.
That have extra space, or okay, I just wonder if there's an inventory of churches that are declining and have extra space or other locations. I mean, that just seems like the most expensive place with some of the most expensive property that we could have in the state. So I wondered about that. I guess the other questions are, I've also heard people talk about whether we should be paying 100% of our general conference apportionments. I've heard people talk about, should we reduce the number of district superintendents? I guess overall I'm just wondering what other places have you looked to cut, and then kind of what led to saying the Wesley Foundation should take on 50% of these cuts?
Do you want to respond to the superintendent's part, Bill?
Yes, there we go. Part of the request from the bishop and that team was to be missional as well. And places like the Lewis Center and others, but specifically from the Lewis Center, have tried to identify in the United States any district that is growing with more than 80 churches. Per district. And what they found is that there's no district in the entire United States that is growing that has more than 80 churches. And more than that, what they found is any churches that have more than 70
districts.
Any districts, yeah, any conference that has districts with more than 70 churches, there actually is none of those that aren't actually declining. So you get over 80, all of them are in decline. You get down to 70, none of them are growing. So part of that is, and I'll just give the rationale that they gave, most people in church leadership would say that leadership deployment is the most important function that we have in the church today. And I would just ask all of you who are church members and pastors, would you want to be deployed to a church based on the information that your superintendent has on you when they maybe have never heard you preach in the last 2 or 3 years? When they haven't had time to be in conversation with your local churches about the needs of that community and congregation? So the answer is yes, we've talked about it, but with those kinds of items of information and research, it becomes pretty difficult to move to a place that would hasten our decline rather than try to develop a strategy that will help us reverse it.
So, Major Clint, that we've got the, what about churches in the area for office spaces, things like that on the list too. And then, okay. So that, all those are parts of where can we find savings, and we're looking for more suggestions beyond to maybe address the higher education budget and not so much. So thanks for that. Yes, Dave.
Good afternoon. My name's Dave Schult. I had the privilege of serving in this district in ministry in 3 places: Iowa City First United Methodist Church, University of Iowa Hospitals in the chaplain's office, and the Wesley Foundation at the University of Iowa. And I firmly believe, after a lifetime of experience in this area of the state, that the university is a prime mission field that we need to be present and active and witnessing in everywhere we can. So it hurts me deeply to see half of the needed $1 million taken from 4 Wesley foundations.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Thank you. Yes.
I just had a pretty simple question.
Since I can't see your name tag, would you introduce yourself quick?
Christine.
Thank you, Christine. That's what I thought it said, but I didn't want to make a mistake.
So on the community and institutional ministry grants, it said they're reduced by $150,000, but it didn't say from what. And I believe he said on the Iowa Religious Media Service, that's 78,000 cut out of 78,000. I wanted to clarify those 2 things.
Yeah, the IRMS budget, and actually for this year it was 82,000. That means that that funding is eliminated, so it's done. In terms of the CCMC budget, Paul Burrow's not here, he's the chair of CCMC, but I believe the intention is to let the Institutional Ministries Committee decide how they would then grant what might be left at this point, correct? Okay. Remember what was left with the amount in institutional ministries? Okay, Bill thinks it's around 78,000, but he's not positive right now. Maggie?
Yeah, I think that's just about it. The 150 was the 3/4 of it.
3/4 of that budget. Yeah, thank you. So it's not making the decision of who or what, but actually, okay. Dr. Charles.
Thank you. Charles Klink. Question I have is, I'm looking at, basically this is a repeat of when we had 12 districts that go down to 9.
8.
With some adjustments or whatever we went to. My concern is we are talking about how can we reallocate and how can we, where can we have savings, et cetera, in order to basically be in survival mode at this point, when we're on the verge of having the largest retirement group begin in the next, beginning now and to grow, the baby boomers. And I haven't heard anything about what are we going to do to reach them and keep them in our churches.
The baby boomers?
Yep.
Okay.
You're looking at millions of people.
Okay.
Do we want them? And that's the biggest question I have is, do we really want them?
Well, since I'm one of those, I think I'm still wanted. I hope you are too, but okay, good question, good question. If you have ideas to how to answer that, we'd love to hear those types of things too, but okay? Well, okay, share it, share it. That's what we're looking for.
I have seen, in fact, the individual who started it, and I've utilized it, so I'm talking from experience. The individual who started was a year ahead of me in seminary, was Presbyterian, Mission Insight, which we have a contract with them, and I have utilized that contract 2 or 3 times, and with a system of outreach which works. They really do, and they have the info. And what I'm experiencing when I talk with them, what I'm experiencing when I work with them, what I'm hearing from them is, do any of you in the United Methodist Church know we're out here? Nobody's using them. We're throwing money away instead of utilizing our resources wisely. We've tried to do, there was a talk 3, 4 years ago, we were going to do some serious evangelism, and maybe it's a little further back. And the reality is, it was a bomb. Because I'm not sure that we really did a serious reflection as to what we mean by that term. And since if we don't know where we're starting, how are we going to know where we're going to end? And so we floundered for 2 or 3 years and threw a lot of expense away at that time, and foolishly.
Okay.
So anyway, before I get too ramped up, I better hand it back.
Thank you. So in summation, it's about how do we utilize the human resources of those the baby boomers who are retiring and keeping them active. Okay, and second. Okay, good. Thank you. And evangelism seriously. Got that, Lillian? Okay. What other comments, questions? John over on the other side.
We've got a lot of emphasis here on what we're going to cut. I'm wondering about some effort about the income side.
Okay.
10 years ago or more, Tom Schenkel suggested that we move toward a passion-driven giving. Wasn't that your term, Tom? Yep. In effect, what it would do is substitute advanced special giving for apportionment giving. That is, people would give to causes that they were committed to. If you take that principle and look at even the cuts that we have to make, one of the basic question is, what can support itself and what can't? And how do we get there? So that some, particularly the community institutional ministries, many of them can support themselves if they are encouraged, if not forced, to do so. Example is, I was on the board of Women at the Well. A part of the job description of the pastor at Women at the Well is, you shall be on the road 40 Sundays a year raising the money. If we change the job descriptions at a number of places, it's painful, and individuals don't like it because it isn't what they signed up for. But if that's where we're at, then we could look at changing, looking at what programs can support themselves. Maggie knows this better than I, but if you look at other conferences' budget, Iowa Conference has a lot of ministries. And those ministries are because somebody cared about something and organized a program to do something. We do a lot of tremendous things, and two things is we've kind of lost those individual boards. There used to be like boards of directors of everything, that so that you had individuals who were committed to things. Now we have representatives from districts rather than people who are committed to a particular cause. We need to have more of the old timers that have, I don't know. We had a guy who was known as Mr. Camps and Conferences. Every time he stood up, you were going to hear something about camps and conferences. We got tired of listening to him, but he was committed to a program, and he stayed with it for 20 years, and he kept a dynamic underneath the program of camps and conferences. We need more of those kind of people who are committed to a cause, and we need to organize more individual boards so that those boards can be supportive of the ministries of the conference. And look at the conference as a collection of ministries rather than bills to be paid.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Since Jim called you out, Tom, did you want to say something? Sure. I thought you might.
Yeah, mostly just to show off my New Orleans Saints shirt. God's team. You know, I guess I don't think I have any comments for that up there. The first thing that I've been thinking about since I came in here, though, is that I wanted to sincerely say, for what it's worth, thank you to the people that have been doing this on this budget task force. All of you I've known for many years, and I know this is hard. In fact, you know, this is hard. I've been as part of the Iowa Annual Conference for 34 years, and it's hard. You know, we look at this, you know, we're passionate, we're interested, we intersect with whether it's Wesley Foundations or camps, and so we see what you guys are recommending, and there's part of us that go, oh, that's good, but oh, now you just touched on something I like, and we get upset. But if we really are in this together, and we are supposed to be, I think we look at this and say, yep, this is hard, but our world has changed and is changing in the United Methodist Church, whether we like it or not. It's not 1979 anymore. It's not 1989. Can we still do what we once did? Not in the way that we've been doing it. Is that fair? And that's, I think, what we're here to talk about. And so does it grieve me? Yes. The director of Pictured Rocks, I'm his pastor. I love him. I've baptized his children. So does this intersect with me personally? You better believe it does. But I understand two things. One, that we worship and serve an all-powerful God, and the church belongs to God. And so what can be birthed? What can be birthed out of this painful time? Secondly, I'm just going to repeat what I already said to this budget task force. Thank you. There's no wisdom I have that's going to surpass or substitute your wisdom, as hard as it is. So for what it's worth, thank you very much for your service.
Thank you, Tom. You're very welcome. We got some other folks. I want to make sure others get a chance, Chuck, and we'll see. Right back. Okay. Bob.
Bob Hoover. I don't have a suggestion. I've got a concern. It comes as a personal one, but also some groups that I'm involved in. Trying to understand the current situation and what our witness, and how to witness to a gospel of love and justice. And from our reflection, looking at our current society, one of the biggest motivating factors is a fear of education. Fear of education in public schools, cutting down public schools, fear of education in higher education, getting rid of higher education. And I think that's a major dynamic in what we live, and we need to somehow or another talk across the boundaries and deal with this fear. But I see that reality, which seems to be a reality to me, and the groups I'm a part of, reflected in a huge cut to higher education ministry.
Okay.
I don't have a suggestion about dollars, but I'm concerned about the apparent overlap of those two issues.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, David.
My name's Dave Glenburns. To take it out of the abstract into the real, I'm one of the ones who will most directly be impacted by these. So I'm really interested in Clint's question about how did you zero in on higher ed to absorb the biggest share of the cuts. And then I'd like to follow up with a couple stories, but it seems like we've passed over the rationale of why it landed on higher ed, and I didn't hear that the last time we heard the presentation either.
Thanks, Dave. That's a good question. And one of the things that we initially talked about was, do we take part of the cuts out of higher ed, part of it out of the Board of Camps? What we were shown from the Board of Camps, the chair is right in front of you, and we're not wanting to pit ministries against one another. But what we saw from them is they have a plan for decreasing, eventually ending conference support or portion support for the Board of Camps. As it was shared with a couple of us who talked to Brian Johnson, that they're on track to do that. The sale of Pictured Rocks will probably help them to escalate that to that move. The question is, do we cut both ministries at the same time? The other thing is, with the diversity of students and congregations, one of our primary goals, and we've heard it in various ways out there, one of the reasons we feel that we're experiencing decreased apportionment receipts is twofold. For some, when we look at many of our congregations, they are decreasing. And the reality is that the majority of our congregations are decreasing. Secondly, part of the reason that they're decreasing is that even some of our largest churches have lost the ability to be in ministry with young adults. I can give you 3 congregations, which I won't do because I don't want to embarrass them, but who are located in college towns who have no ministry plan for young adults. When asked why, it was someone else's responsibility to do it. It really is our hope, and the cut is reluctant, but one of the potential outcomes is that if our congregations got together with our Wesley foundations and our colleges to figure out how to do ministry with young adults and students in a different way, that would benefit our ministry to everyone. Nobody likes this cut. At least no one on the budget team likes this cut. I will just tell you that. We are having difficulty trying to be good stewards, seeing another way. Would it work, making half of it in Board of Camps and half of it in the Board of Higher Ed and Campus Ministry? That might be a potential thing, or does it put more and more stress on both ministries? That's why we're doing these. We want to hear from all of you about a better way forward. For us, it's clearly the path, at least in our thinking and understanding, is more clearly there that our student ministries have the capability of partnering more quickly with local congregations and people.
Can I add?
Follow up? Sure.
Can
yes,
I follow up with that?
Yeah.
Just to be clear, there are 8 institutions of higher education impacted by the Board of Higher Ed cut. It's not just 4 Wesley foundations. So if you do the math, what that leaves us is about $5,000 for each institution to do campus ministry. I'm curious how we're supposed to be able to partner in doing campus ministry on $5,000, because that doesn't even pay for a student to come clean the building. So when you're asking us to partner, or in here it says to partner with the Wesley foundations, with a cut like this, it means there's effectively not going to be a Wesley foundation. So that's I still would like to know why you stopped at 44,000 and didn't just, with an effect like that, why not zero it all the way out? It has the same effect.
You want to say it, John?
I'll give an answer for me why we didn't zero it out. And because what we would like to do is to provide seed money for grants. And see, that's what we have done, is kind of divided up our money equally. I'm going to answer for myself. I'm not sure just dividing dollars up equally is being the best steward. What I would hope would happen with those grants, and that's up to the Board of Higher Ed and Campus Ministry, but what I hope would happen is that maybe grants could be given to congregations and ministries where they are devising projects or partnering opportunities, where those funds could provide seed money to enable that to happen.
Go ahead.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just for clarity, that sounds reasonable if you're talking maybe about Iowa City or Ames, where there are United Methodist churches right across the street from campus. But in Cedar Falls, the closest United Methodist congregation is about 1.5 miles from campus. The closest mainline denomination church is 1 mile. The Wesley Foundation is right across the street. There are There's the Roman Catholic Student Center, the Missouri Synod Lutheran Student Center at UNI, and that's the only churches. So thinking about our situation, we have been developing partners. We've got partners in several denominations. The reality of this is that part of what this funding does is we've been anticipating this, maybe not quite as precipitous as cutting $120,000 out of our budget in 1 year, but we have been making plans. We have a long-term giving strategy. We have the mechanisms in place. We are working on this as following up from a conversation with Bishop Laurie when she first came that we needed to become self-sustaining. The reality in our situation is that we're becoming more ecumenical, and we will be less a ministry. We won't be a ministry of the annual conference anymore. We will be a historically United Methodist. So just to be clear, one of the effects of this is that the annual conference is giving up its campus ministry presence. The Iowa Conference has been a leader in higher education for 100 years, 50 years, 60 years. If we go to campus ministry conferences, student ministries over the years, the Iowa Conference has always been respected. I like the idea of working with partner congregations, and we have been developing partnerships with the United Methodist Churches in Waterloo and Cedar Falls. Okay. I find myself, I thought those were the things that I was going to talk about, but I thought in Bill's answer, I find myself getting a little more worked up because what it sounded like you were saying, Bill, was that the Board of Camps was able to make a plan to reduce its dependency on conference funding. I find that interesting because there's two paid by the conference staff people relating to the Board of Camps who work in the headquarters. There has not been a paid by the conference staff person with campus ministry in their portfolio since Eric Guy left the leadership development minister when he had the generational ministries and campus ministry. So we haven't had a person in the building coaching us. And I know working with Ryan Risdahl on the Board of Higher Ed, we have not felt like, I mean, it's kind of been up to us to figure out what to do. So it feels to me a little bit like if you've got somebody in-house in the building, the cuts are mitigated a little bit because you've got somebody who knows what the process is. And so I would like to make sure that the boards and agencies, I don't know if community and institutional ministries has anybody specifically advocating for them close. That's just that we have been, our Board of Higher Ed is working, has been working. Our local boards, in many instances, are working to mitigate that. But our long-term funding, I feel pretty confident about our long-term at Three House, Wesley Foundation in Cedar Falls. I feel pretty confident of our viability. This cut jeopardizes getting to that point where we can do the long-term sustainability. We've had increased income each of the last 4 or 5 years, more miscellaneous income this year. It would be enough to cover our program expenses and possibly keeping the building going. But with this cut, we won't have any personnel. So then I guess we'll depend on the local churches around to come in and do the ministry. So that's just so you can hear what some of the reality is, not to make it abstract, but that's what the situation is from Cedar Falls.
Good. Thank you, Dave. Thank you. Go ahead, Gabe. It should be on. He's controlling it back there. So.
Excellent. My name is Gabe, and I'm also directly affected by some of the proposals, specifically to sell Pictured Rocks Camp. I'm the director there at Pictured Rocks Camp. So just a couple of comments and then some things for clarification. One, I don't think I'm blowing any minds here when I say we have a pastor shortage in the United Methodist Church and the Iowa Conference. I apologize for using an ELCA Lutheran statistic. I haven't been able to find anything in the United Methodist Church, but something like 70% of pastors attribute some of their experiences, camp experiences, to feeling that call into pastoral ministry. I don't have any campus ministry statistics, so I apologize from that side of things. But my fear is, if we move away from a camp on this side of the state, we play into a further need for pastors, so pastors not feeling that call. The other thing that I was asked for a point of reference for this group is if it can be elaborated on a little bit about how the Board of Camps is proposing to get to zero apportionment support.
Thanks, Gabe.
Tell you a little bit. We are going to use some of this, if the camp is sold at Pictured Rocks, well, some of that money will be endowed, and then the rest of it will be used for deferred maintenance at the other two sites, which is, there's extreme amount of things that need to be done at the other two sites. But the plan for, what I understand the plan to be, is that we are going to start asking our constituency to hopefully then subsidize the operational cost of the personnel at the sites. So, because the program is usually covered by the expenses of the kids that come and the rental, but the personnel cost is what we use the apportionment dollar for right now. And so if we can get away from needing that by just a $10 gift per person, for instance, over the long term, should have enough money then to pay for that. And then to start working on endowments so that we can endow the rest of the sites. And at some point then do something else over here if we need to, so.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you. Oh, Ann, yes. Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Ann, and I am one this will be personally affected. And I have it's a kind of a twofold question. One, I've asked this and have yet to hear an answer to. With these recommendations, no longer have the funding. What is in place to prevent this a year from now being in the same situation? And when we downsized districts and combined them, a lot of the same conversation was discussed then, including selling camps. We're not solving problems here, we're just accommodating year by year and other camps from being sold off.
Okay. There's several different questions there.
Yes, I've got a few more too.
Okay. Camps because one was near where I was serving and living, and that's Clear Lake Methodist Camp. That camp was sold for, if I remember, completely. Cedar Falls Western Homes have sold it off. And if I'm saying something that's not quite right, somebody remembers better, tell me. But I think that's what happened. Yes? Okay. Group, what was
in place going forward?
what is in place going forward for?
As far as you can cut the camps, you can cut district staff.
Yeah.
But what is going, I mean, this is like a repeat from a few years ago. So what is in place to prevent this a year from?
Well, I think we're trying to do year to year, right? I mean, that's the reality. Their connectional giving, They are unable to support their connectional giving because our people are dying. And we haven't replaced those individuals in our congregation who have faithfully supported our United Methodist Church. So that's, to me, that would be my perspective, the elephant in the room. So what's the plan? It's probably going to be survival year to year until we address the important piece of our life together.
Thank you, Lillian. Let's again, let me see if somebody else, Charles, first, okay? Oh, in the back there. Here, I'm coming. Oh, Maggie's got you.
Norm Anderson. The question about the going from the 8 district offices to
locations cited for each of those 4 offices. Some of that is work that Maggie's doing in terms of which of the offices have leases that do not end now, or, well, not now, but a couple of our district offices don't have leases at all. Some of them have leases that extend out to how far, Maggie?
One, I think, is 2021.
Okay, I think early 2021.
Early, yeah.
You know, so how do we make a cost-effective transition, and whether those sites would serve as a by-district office, those things are still being worked on at this point. But there's some ideas, but nothing's been decided about those things. And of course, on those lines too. Does that help? Any other questions with that, Norm? No, but if you have an Iowa map that's even divided up by the district lines, and you probably have an idea what those are, you start looking at places where there's good transportation. That was one of the criteria for the previous committee that chose the 8 locations now. Internet capabilities, things like that, ability to get from place. But this is also a different plan where the superintendents are making commitments to be out with offices, not offices per se, but making church visits where maybe in one area where pastors and churches from 20, 30 miles away can drive in to see there, and do that very regularly and very frequently to be out on the districts. So that's a different function than having people come to a district office. So we also know that in most of our districts, there's very little foot traffic through the district office except for meetings. And sometimes those can be held in churches and so forth. So again, it's a lot of moving pieces, but those are the concepts. Okay. Brian had a question down here. Okay. All right.
Just following up on your comment about the superintendents being out and about, are they going to be sleeping elsewhere? Are they going to be living in their home and sleeping in their home?
Yes.
Okay, so they're going to be commuting to this other spot daily, whatever the other spot is that they travel out and about.
Yes, there'd be this. The district parsonages would still be where they're at. So there'll be some increased costs for the leased cars, but that's very efficient use of monies to use those leased cars. And not driving all over the place all the time, but just selected places, strategic places to connect pastors and churches, and area pastors and churches, kind of like not the old sub-districts, but circuits or something like that. Okay. Chuck?
A couple of items that I wrote down as I was listening to what's being said and that crossed my mind. One is, has the cabinet discussed the possibility of expanding the particular seminaries that they visit and get beyond, so we have a breadth of theological differentiation in terms of who we bring in?
I can answer that one too, and be on the cabinet. The cabinet is actually visiting all of the United Methodist seminaries, plus Asbury and other, and plus Asbury, UDTS, and others as well. And not only the cabinet, but also the Board of Ministries making strategic visits and as well, so that double up on the number of visits. Now, the challenge for that is this, is that more and more campuses are going to distance learning, is what some call it, which means to get there on campus when there's actually students there is really tough. No, I call too, but to see them, but to actually see people face to face, which will really make the biggest impact, That's at very targeted times, and so we're attempting to get that done too. Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, and my youngest son did that 17 years ago. That's why he's been in Colorado ever since, and he's never coming back except to visit. So anyway, so yes. Oh, okay.
Has there been, I'm sure you've discussed it, and in terms of this visitation and all these great plans that we've got, what is the cabinet's preparedness in terms of the impact from the general conference vote?
Well, I think we can handle that one in 30 seconds. No, not 30 seconds. We've had quite a bit of conversation, and that's also in terms of the bishops and cabinets operational teams meeting together, going through scenarios, what ifs, and the what ifs are all over the board. What are the potentials in terms of churches leaving, pastors leaving, members leaving, members not leaving, pastors, all that sort of stuff, all those things. So we've talked about a number of different scenarios, and of course the answer is no one knows what's going to happen. We also keep in contact with other conferences, the cabinets and the bishops talk as well, and also conversations with you folks and conversations you've had with us to help us understand what's going on. We know that there are churches and pastors and lay people, both sides and in the middle of the issues and all the spectrums. Some of them have been very faithful in paying apportionments. Some have not been. They've been faithful to their convictions and withheld for those convictions. All of that has an effect on everything. If a congregation decides to pay only a portion of their apportionments, or it's going back to what Lillian said about apportionments, or a small portion of the apportionments they're withholding for whatever reason it might be, since we currently have a conference rule order that says that we pay 100% of our general church apportionments, that means it affects everything else. So it isn't really targeted as what we might think it would be. It actually does affect everything that we're talking about here. And you know what? It's happened with pastors and lay people who are in different positions. I'm really encouraged and thankful for the courageous pastors and lay people who have had a chance to sit down, taken the opportunity to sit down and talk to each other about where their hearts are, even though they're in different places. That's an amazing thing to see. And the prayers that everybody's working through those things too. So it's if there's another elephant in the room, that's the other elephant, because we don't know what's going to happen after February. It may have a drastic, it may have the effect of who knows at this point. But I do know one thing that we've wrestled with a lot is, as hard as these things are, I don't want to be someone who tells a conference person, an employee, I never want to be with someone to say that we have to eliminate your job. That hurts. That hurts everybody. It hurts especially the person. I also don't want to be somebody who says, by the way, we have to furlough, which we did a number of years ago. We got to furlough conference staff for 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, kind of like what's happening with the government, because bills have still got to be paid. I also don't want to say, and this is why we did not fill Sarah Carlson's position as which would have been my assistant, administrative assistant. We didn't fill that position because we didn't want to go in to hire somebody else when, knowing what we know, we may have to let that person go in 3 months or 6 months or a year. That's cruel. That's cruel. So in the midst of all this stuff, that's the difficulties. Not only we as budgeting, but you are also wrestling with. We know that. And we know that local churches have been wrestling with this sort of thing for years too, for years. Well, they are, yeah. But at the same time, it's not easy. That's why we're listening to you and asking you, what are we missing that we need to see better? It's not our intention to make anybody feel as if we're picking on a particular area, whether it be higher education or the DAAs or the offices or whoever it might be. That's not the intention at all. The intention is we've got to do something with this because, in a sense, we have to make some quick responses. Otherwise, the conference's health, its financial health, let alone other things, will really diminish very, very quickly into 2019, especially in 2020. So, thank you for that. I'm sorry, I get breathless and start to cry when things get like this going. So, anyway, yeah.
I just wanted to say, Brian Oliver. I just wanted to say that I've heard twice now mentioned the rule of order that we have that binds us to paying 100% of apportionments. that actually came to the floor of annual conference. That was actually a motion from the floor of annual conference a number of years ago. And if we want to change that, I mean, that's one of the things that the conference can change. It's difficult for leadership, just like it'd be difficult in your churches, and churches, I know there's churches that have had that conversation of, we're going to pay this much, we're going to pay this much as kind of a decisional thing, but you know, it used to be the policy of the conference that we paid apportionments, general conference apportionments proportionally to what we received.
Right.
So, I mean, there's nothing stopping the conference from going back to that. It just takes a vote.
That was about 12 years ago, I think, the same time we went from 12 districts to 8. Tom was involved with some things about that time too, and a number of different ideas that were talked about then. So, and I think, you know, one of the, I'm sorry, I'm probably talking too much, but I'm going to say this. One of the things that we all, and I've wrestled with too, is that we can look back and say, what if, we should have. There's plenty of things there that we all made mistakes about. I did too as a local pastor, made mistakes about. And we're reaping some of that now. So the question is, are we going to learn from those as best we can and go into a future which is somewhat uncertain, and then try to adapt and adjust, and then work our way through. So, Clint, did you want to say something again? Okay. Maggie's right there.
I just want to reiterate what Tom said about saying thank you to all of you that have worked so hard on this. I know that it's not easy. And I want to say, you know, I've gotten extremely lucky in my ministry career in that Matthew 25, 11 years ago, had a $30,000 budget and has grown to now have close to $1 million budget over the last 10 years. And a lot of that has been while facing uncertainty. But a lot of it's been because we've had a lot of people that have been really creative in thinking about ministry. And so I hope that, like Jim said, the conference will somehow get to a place where we can think creatively about how to grow ministry going forward, because I do think there are a lot of ways that can happen and a lot of possibilities. And so I hope that'll be very quickly the next step, is to convene a team of creative, budget-minded people and somehow start to think about how do we grow this again.
Good. Yes, Ryan.
I was able to find how much Aldersgate and Golden Valley were sold for, which was approximately $715,000 for both, and that was one of them was sold to the Forest Service at cost per acre for agricultural land. And Brian Johnson texted me and said that the money was all given to the camps, and over half of that money was used to build the dining hall at Okoboji currently, and the rest was used for capital improvements. So hopefully that helps answer that question.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Okay. Tom.
Harlan, just, you know, since about 12 years ago has been invoked several times, it made me think about something that Bishop Palmer said in quoting Miles Davis, that in improv music, the difference between a good note and a bad note is the note that comes after. And I was sitting here thinking, okay, you all have worked on a note. We don't know what's coming after. There's a lot more to this elephant than just decreased apportionment receipts. My goodness. We are dealing with changes in our culture, changes in Methodism as well as our culture that are beyond us, you know, like declining institutionalism, whatever. But I still want to sound that word of hope. We don't know what the next note's going to be. So we don't know whether this is good or bad yet. Is that fair? But I sure hope that we can model something different than the culture outside our walls, where we get into our camps and tribes and beat up on each other and call each other names and get on social media and say rotten things about each other. I want to still believe that we're better than that. No matter what our differences in theology, ideology, and understandings of scriptural interpretation and authority, we are still supposed to be Jesus' people. And so can we go through this tough time, no matter what happens in St. Louis, no matter what happens with apportionment receipts, all that, can we go through this together or not? That's the next note. I just wanted to share that.
That's a sign. We are getting close to our hour and a half time, so. Yes, Ann. Go ahead.
Okay. So we start with the recommendations, and that goes where? And then does that group make the decisions and it's done, or does any of this go to annual conference?
That's a great question. Bill can help answer some of that. It's the difference between operational items and ministry items. So, Bill, go ahead.
Sure, Ann. Some of those, like I had said at the beginning, and this was the thing that we wanted to get better at communicating. So each time all of you are helping us, I just want to reiterate again, and I know Harlan's going to do this soon, that we have an email address, and if you have some suggestions, we hope that you will send them to us. We promise you everything gets considered. So if you see another way for us to do this that you think we haven't looked at hard enough, let us know. I mean that from the bottom of my heart, because we do not like having to be in this position. But with the operational ones, and as I said, regarding staff and those kinds of things, as we see efficiencies as they happen, we'll try to address them then. One of the values of conference leadership was to try wherever possible to deal with staffing changes through attrition. And honestly, we know this is not going to get us where we need to be. I'm just going to say that up front. I wish I could say we're going to get through this and that will be it. I know that's not the case. All of us know that's not the case. So as we see regarding staffing opportunities to make changes, the leadership team at the conference center will make those changes. Some of the others will require our collective voice at annual conference, but the recommendations will go from here. That is all of our refining of those. We'll meet in February right away to try to incorporate the best things we can, and what we couldn't incorporate or didn't feel comfortable incorporating, we'll communicate with all of the conference as to why. We've been trying to do that as we're going through. But then that goes to the bishop and cabinet operational teams. They will make their decision, but ultimately, which is the reason why John is on this group and Paul Burrow is on this group, it goes to CFNA and CCMC. Ours are recommendations. That's what we were asked to do. We're not a decision-making body. We don't have any power to make any decisions. So those will go to them. They will act on them, and then most of those program decisions will have to be decided on the floor of annual conference.
And question right there. Did that help, Ann? Sure.
Yes, sorry, I'm thoroughly indoctrinated. CFNA is the Conference Council on Finance and Administration. And so they're ultimately the group elected by our conference to put us on the path of good stewardship, financial sustainability, and missional engagement. CCMC is the Conference Connectional Ministries Council, and that is the group that's given oversight of our program ministries throughout the annual conference. And so the budget request ultimately that goes to CFNA is going to come from CCMC. So they will have to act, and I believe they have in the schedule, Harlan, is it the first, it's...
Which meeting?
CCMC, their budget meeting.
Oh, the ministry plans are being...
program review is this coming week.
Is Thursday, Friday, if I remember right. And then CCMC meets in, I got to look it up, but it's in
it's either the end of February or March.
Yeah.
Where those decisions, their decisions will be made that they'll send back to CFNA.
So Bill makes a really good distinction in the sense that we want to make sure this is clear, is that all of the ministry areas of CCMC.
February 16th for CCMC. Thank you to Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn. All of those things in the Conference Connectional Ministry Council, those ministry plans were due to come in to Felicia Coe in the Conference Center in the middle of December. Those are going to program review this next weekend, or next Thursday, Friday. Those then go on to CCMC, and CCMC makes their decision as to what they're going to propose to annual conference, not our recommendations. So you get the difference between that? If a ministry area believes that they need X amount of dollars funding, they should be putting in a ministry plan that says that. But don't take our, because our recommendations mean nothing at this point in terms of ministry areas. In terms of ministry areas, it means nothing because we're not the decision-making body about that. It's only recommendations, or at least starting places. So any CCMC board or agency or committee should be doing their due diligence to make sure they have the ministry plan in at the level of funding they think is important. Then CCMC works with that to figure that out. And then that gets sent on to CFNA, and they work with that to figure that out. And if they say, hold it, folks, we need to come back and do some more look at this. So that's been one of our challenges over the years. It's been really, really hard for us to prioritize. We love doing everything. And when that's a wonderful thing, we love it. But we're at the point where we have to prioritize. Where are we at with those things, right, Bill? So we want to make sure that that those things all come in and get done there. So great. Did we answer your question? And yeah, and too. Lisa, did we answer your question?
Oh yeah, I was.
Okay.
Just being the acronym police.
Oh, that's fine. Glad for that.
Just a quick clarification.
Quirky clarification?
Yeah. It's afternoon on Sunday. It's
yeah,
nap
right.
time.
That's right.
So about the Iowa Religious Resource Media.
Iowa Religious Media Services. IRMS.
Thank you. Will that be able to continue through private funding? Is that the hope after June 30th, or are they dissolving completely?
There's a board member right there.
Oh, yes.
Because he was at the last board meeting last week, and he can give you the update on that.
The Iowa Religious Media Services is a separate nonprofit that they run their own board, have their own funding, because there's a number of other denominations. Will they be able to continue after June? At the moment, probably not. The way their funding has been over the years and what they foresee into the future, that's probably not going to happen.
And then a side question, what will happen to all the resources that are in
The question is what's going to happen to the resources that they have? The board is the IRMS board is starting to look at the options that are available to donate that to other entities. There is nothing else like IRMS that it can be given to. There's a couple smaller things, but can they handle it? And like what we're experiencing here, this is my commentary, they have talked about it, but you got to make the hard decisions. And when we fail to adapt to the changes, something comes along and precipitates these huge events. And unfortunately, that's what's happening, and we're seeing that here. As a layperson, as a church member, just out there, I see these things in my local church. How can we fund what we want to do? And but the IRMS, they are looking at that. So there will be some communication coming out, I believe, this week or within the next week or so, letting folks know what's going to happen, and then they're all for. Someone's got some input as to what to do with the stuff. They'd like to hear it.
We received communication, that's why I'm asking.
Oh, you got a letter or an email? Okay. Yeah, I was a little muddy as to when that was going to come out, because we've been working on something here too. So.
Good. Barb?
Back to IRMS, you said that decision has been made.
The decision
that the $78,000 were done as March 31st.
What was budgeted for this year was just at $82,000. By the end of March, they will be paid 1/4 of that. And maybe the check has already been cut, I'm not sure. It's already been cut and given to them. So they have that to work with from the first 3 months of our giving to that.
And that was just through CFNA that made that decision?
No, that was our operational team that made the decisions on that.
See.
Because again, we're concerned about operations. How are we going to are we going to get through 2019, and where can we make the least amount of, I don't know what's, least, I don't want to say least amount of damage, but what can we do that's going to make an impact that's not going to affect other things that we consider perhaps, they're very critical ministries.
And because it's ecumenical, there are other denominations involved in
yes.
possibly being able to house the materials.
Well, there is, but looking at the budget, and I'm trying to remember, Dwayne, you've seen it more than I have. I believe there's what, how many other denominations? 7, 6? 6.
There are 6 total.
I think, for me, over the years, I thought, probably 20 or 30. 6? Yeah. Here.
Even though we're ending the funding at the end of March, we still will be the largest contributor to IRMS, if that tells you something.
So what's happened over the years is like a small church that gets upside down in its giving pyramid, where there's one donor that's providing the majority percentage of the budget, and that one donor has to go to the care center, dies, whatever it might be, and then that's what happens with the church. So, yes. We're actually at 4:20, but somebody else having a hand up? Back here, Norma, you haven't talked yet, so. Well, to a microphone.
Harlan knows me well. Just a response to you, CEF, Christian Educators Fellowship. When I was on Board of Discipleship 3 years ago, they were trying to develop, and they had developed sharing closets. And Harlan, the North Central District has one where they share media resources. And so I would say if you're looking for a place, they were wanting to expand that to all the districts at that time. And because I'm not on that board any longer, this might be a good impetus for them to ramp up and get that taken care of.
Northeast District, North Central District, several other districts do too. I'm not sure about Southeast, not yet. But that's one other idea in which churches starting to share media resources. Media resources are also delivered in a very different way than they were 20, 30 years ago. You know that as well.
I know that they're aware of some of that, but if you would, on the email that we have, send that information in so that we would have a contact and that kind of thing, and I can feed that back to them.
Yeah, please do. Please do. Yeah, good. Dave.
Just a real quick question as we're talking about the IRMS. For those of us that receive conference funding, what are the chances that how reliable is our income as Wesley Foundations for 2019? Should we be contingentizing so that it could be
John,
decided?
Maggie?
John, go ahead.
John. Maggie says John.
The 2019 budget was passed at annual conference last year. As far as CF&A goes, as long as the money is there, we will continue to fund at those levels. Unless recommendations come our way from the bishop's operational team, but then the CF&A would have to make that decision. And I would just add, go back to Maggie's first statement. We cut into reserves by $1 million this year.
It's very possible we will.
Okay. Books aren't, yeah. Books aren't quite closed yet. And if you're in business mindset, you need 90 days. And so, I mean, this really is a pinch point now. It's when we first made the recommendation nearly 2 years ago about the $1 million by 2020, 2021, right? We looked at the charts, we looked at the trends, everything, and we were right, maybe even not quite enough right, because we're 1 million short this year, and it's only 2018. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Good. Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you all for being here today. Have these conversations, not easy conversations, but thank you for your, not only your input, but the way in which you shared your things. Thank you for the caring way that you are for yourselves and for each others, and for the conference and for the ministries that you love so dearly. Thank you for that passion. That's a very, very important thing, because that's how, it's a critical thing. It's how we perceive the Holy Spirit working in our lives. And as a body of Christ with many different members, with many different, in some ways, perspectives, but especially gifts and graces and callings that we have, that's the reason you're here, is because you care, because you love, because you believe that there's something very, very important about the life of the church and the transformation that God wants for the world. And especially that little part of the prayer. The Lord's Prayer is a great prayer, isn't it? All the way through, isn't it? At various times in my life, I've had favorite parts of that. Like, for instance, just the personal greeting, Abba, dear parent. But also, lately, it seems like one that keeps coming back is, how do we allow God's kingdom and work with God's kingdom to be made real on earth? And that's what I think a lot of this is about, too. So thank you very much for your time here today. I take, Tom, your comments about hope and about what it means to the future. I've been saying on February 27th, the Great Commandment has not been struck from the Bible, and the Great Commission has not been struck from the Bible. And neither one of those have a theological camp that it only resides in, right? So our mission and ministry is still there. So how do we keep doing that together for as long as we can keep doing it together, and especially doing it with God? With God. Okay. Lillian, you? Yes. Oh, yes. Remember? Oh, yes. Oh, we have some live feed participants. We should have told you that before we started. The world is watching and listening. And
just send in their comments.
And remember to send in your comments. This feels like a commercial at the end of the... Remember to send your comments and thoughts, questions into budget@iaumc.org, and we'll get back to you with responses as soon as possible. So, Lillian, would you pray us out of here? Thank you.
Yes.
I did ask it. I didn't say Lillian do it.
Oh, okay. You asked it. I'll do it. Let us pray. Gracious God, oh, what a privilege to be in your work, in your church, in the United Methodist Church. And we pray that we leave this place while we carry a heavy burden, that we find deep in our hearts that we love you because you first loved us. And we pray that if our spirits are troubled and disheartened, pour, O Christ, your shalom. We pray for every participant, every member, every worker and servant, leaders, pastors, lay members, all across our United Methodist churches in Iowa. And help us capture the hope that has been articulated at this meeting. For it is in that hope that we move forward. Well, it's not all about us. but it's you who is laboring to make every heart, every church, every street, and every community and around the world to be the place where your will is accomplished. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Go in peace.